Welcome to Investing in Integrity. I'm Ross Overline, CEO and co-founder of Scholars of Finance, a rapidly growing organization on a mission to inspire character and integrity in the finance leaders of tomorrow. If you're an investor, finance professional, or student aspiring to make an impact with capital, this show is for you. Investing in Integrity brings you conversations with leading minds in finance to help you learn how you can make finance a force for good by investing in integrity. On today's episode, we were honored to have Bill George as our guest. Bill George is a legendary corporate executive and leadership author. He was a board member at Goldman Sachs, ExxonMobil, Target, several large companies. He is one of the most respected voices in leadership today. Bill was, after several decades of a career, the chairman and CEO of Medtronic, one of the leading medical technology and innovation companies in the world, where during his 10 years leading the company, he grew the company's market capitalization from about $1 billion to over $60 billion, and setting the stage and a foundation for very significant growth since then. Beyond the boardroom, Bill has dedicated the last 2 decades to shaping the next generation of executives and leaders. He's a teacher at Harvard Business School where he teaches some of their CEO and executive programs. He's a mentor. He's the author of several best-selling books, including True North, which we talk about today, which have become essential reading for MBA students and executives across the globe. Bill is an incredible human. We were introduced to each other by several of our advisors and large donors here at SOF, and I was immediately struck by his passion for authentic leadership, for knowing our values, for serving others, for doing the right thing. A lot of the things you hear us talk about here at SOF or that you hear me talk about on the podcast or in other speaking engagements. We've had a number of conversations since then and have gotten to know each other a lot. And I was so grateful that Bill decided to come on the podcast to share some of his wisdom and insights with all of us in this community. We talk about Bill's story, some of his crucibles, some of the experiences in his life that formed and shaped him as a leader, which he begins with. We talk about his corporate career, his board leadership at Goldman Sachs. Then we talk about the financial system today. We talk about the Federal Reserve. We talk about some moves the current administration has been making in our financial system. We talk about crony capitalism and free market capitalism, really relevant and salient topics today. And then we shift into a conversation about leadership, something Bill's been teaching and speaking about for over 20 years now, and reaches over 270,000 followers on LinkedIn with and across other channels. We talk about a number of opportunities and challenges that finance and investing in business leaders face today and what young and emerging leaders need to do about it starting now. We talk about how to combat greed and not let the corrosive nature of greed get to us. We talk about how to build long-term value for all stakeholders and resist just short-term profit pressure at all costs. And we talk a lot about authentic leadership, one of his core frameworks. And we apply it to leading through change and leading through crisis and transformation, which is going to feel super relevant to anybody listening to this conversation today. And Bill was kind enough to let me bring us to the topic of compassion and humility, something that I've been sharing recently we need more of in our country. And he talks about what that looks like in finance, in business, in investing, and from all leaders, from all of us. And then, of course, we get to end on our rapid fire. This was an amazing conversation and will be hopefully the first of many with Bill in the years to come. And it is with great pleasure that I bring you Bill George. Bill George, it is truly an honor to have you on the Investing in Integrity podcast, sir. We have so much ground to cover, but before we jump in first, can you share with our audience, how are you and where are you calling in from?
I'm in Minneapolis today and life is great. It's going to be 90 here today, so no complaints. Everything is going well.
I appreciate that. I'm in my summer shirt because it's going to be in the 80s here, even as we enter the fall season. So trying to stretch out the summer as long as we can. Bill, we have so much ground to cover and it feels like never enough time. So I want to jump right in. I want to begin with our audience and community that might not know you. For you to begin with your story, can you take us back to your journey personally and professionally to set the scene?
Well, my story goes all the way back to my times in junior high and high school where I wanted desperately to be a leader and was never chosen to lead anything. And my father pushing me in this direction to make up for some of his failures, and never, being part of lots of organizations, never been elected to the student council, even good enough tennis player to play college tennis, not even be co-captain of a high school tennis team. So my senior year, I ran for president of senior class, and I was sure I was a better candidate, but I lost by a margin of 2-1. So it was like a bucket of cold water. And then I went off to Georgia Tech and ran for office 6 more times and lost all 6. So now I was 0 for 7, and realizing I was a loser. And some seniors took me aside and said to me, Bill, look, no one is ever going to want to work with you, much less follow you, because you're moving so fast to get ahead. You never take time for other people. And that was like a blow to the solar plexus, because I realized leadership is all about relationships. It's all about who you're with and do you care about them. And I was pushing too hard to get ahead. Maybe I thought titles are important, which they're really not important. And so it's all about relationships. So that was a great learning, and it set me on a leadership course, which I followed to this day. So that was very, very important to get going here.
Bill, I've got to say, I really appreciate you opening up with that set of stories, being vulnerable and being open about some of those early failures and lessons. Um, when you look at your resume, CEO of a Fortune 500 company, on the boards of Goldman Sachs, Exxon Mobil, teaching the CEO programs at Harvard Business School for many years. I think that's a great way to start, because a lot of people would assume you just have this perfect story and perfect resume. You've got us up through college. Can you share with our listeners just as kind of a synopsis of your career since college, your professional career to date?
Well, I went straight through, but people don't do today, from engineering degree at Georgia Tech to getting my MBA at Harvard Business School. And so when I came out, I was 23 years old, and went to work because I knew I would probably change jobs. I went to work in the U.S. government in the Department of Defense, where they were trying to bring in a lot of management theories and techniques into the government. And I'm very excited about a lot of the people working there. It was a great learning experience, working for the CFO of the Defense Department for 2 years, and then working for the Secretary of the Navy. So it's just a great, real tremendous growth experience. And then, but during that time, I suffered some personal tragedies. My mother died 4 months after I got there. I was 24 at the time when my mother died, and my father called to tell me this. And I was very close to my mother, not so close to my father. So it's very hard to hear, and it took a while to recover. And after that, I fell in love with a woman from Macon, Georgia, who lived about 4 blocks away from us. We didn't live together in those days, in Georgetown. And she developed headaches, and we were getting married. And literally 3 weeks to the absolute day we were getting married, she died of a malignant brain tumor, a glioblastoma. And this was a tremendous shock for me. And even though I'm a person of faith, my faith had no answers. And so dealing with that, fortunately, I had friends that came around me and supported me through this difficult time. But now the 2 women I was closest to. But sometimes in life, and I would say this about my career later on, that sometimes in life, things happen. You don't know why they happened. I told you about her death, but I was at a dinner party, and since I was there as a single person, the others were a couple. There was a woman there. It turned out to be my wife, Penny. So we met then, and we just had our 56th wedding anniversary. So I can't explain all this to you, Ross, but this is a very, best thing that ever happened to me in my life was meeting Penny, and she helped me a lot. So that's been great. I had another crucible and very difficult time. I had seen my father put this idea in my head when I was 10 years old. I'm going to be CEO of some major company. He even named the companies he wanted to be a CEO of. I worked for 3 of them for summer jobs. One was Coca-Cola, one was Procter & Gamble, one was IBM. But, I was en route to be CEO of Honeywell. And there's another candidate, but, modestly, I was certainly one of the leading candidates. And one day I was doing a lot of series of turnarounds. I always see myself as a growth-oriented leader who likes to build things. I know how to take things apart. I know how to lay people off. That's not how I want to spend my whole life. And after I get done with one turnaround at Honeywell, they give me another one. They give me a third one. It was very challenging. So I remember one day it was like I had a bolt of lightning looking in a rearview mirror and realizing, even though on the surface I was telling everyone I was doing great, inside I was deeply unhappy. And I realized that this company had no purpose. The only purpose was making money, and nothing I could really associate. They had good values, but I couldn't really get excited about the business. And I'd always thought I was going to lead a major company. And so I went to my men's group the next day, and we've now been meeting over 50 years in our group. Anyway, I told them what I was feeling and said, well, you turned down Medtronic 3 times for a job. Why'd you turn them down? And you'll see my ego coming out here. And I said, well, I always thought I was going to run a large company. It's kind of a mid-sized company today, even though it's grown from where I first talked to them. Well, they offered me the job, and I remember I wound up leaving Honeywell and going to Medtronic in the number 2 role. And the business, the whole corporation was about a third of the sector I was running at Honeywell. But I had to learn the lesson that size doesn't really matter. But when I walked in the door, I felt I was coming home, because here's a place that had a mission, restoring people to full life and health, and a set of values that I could really adhere to and really go with. And I've always seen myself as a value-centered person. And so this was an opportunity to really practice that in real time. And so it was the best decision of my personal career, my career that I've ever made. And it kind of led to not just what I did at Medtronic, but everything I've done since then at Harvard Business School and writing books and other things, serving on boards.
Bill, you had quite an incredible run at Medtronic. You drove nearly 20% CAGR at Medtronic over the course of your time there and your leadership there. Can you share a little bit more about that journey, kind of that tenure? And would love to hear you share a little bit more about some of the board service and board leadership that you've done during and after that time.
You know, one thing I learned, Ross, is that great companies really have one thing that makes them great, and they have a lot of other things that kind of what they call table stakes, that they do well but not great. And the thing in Medtronic we did that was great was create breakthrough innovations that help restore people to full life and health. And it started with the pacemaker, then the defibrillator, then the stents, then spinal surgery and brain surgery and all pain and everything else. But the key was, interesting enough, our share price was directly correlated with those innovations. And there were periods of high innovation, stock did well. Periods of no innovation, stock didn't do well. So I put the emphasis on breakthrough innovation, meeting unmet medical needs, not just another pacemaker, although we had some breakthroughs there, but continue to invest in new products and then acquiring a series of companies. I remember later in my tenure, we acquired in a space of about 18 months, 5 major companies and spent about $13 billion, which for a company of our size was dramatic, and it transformed the company, almost doubled our revenues. But taking those kind of risks, but also it brought us into a lot of new fields of innovation, which was one of the best things we could do. And then it carried through for some period of time. So that was a great joy. And the stock price went with it, the earnings went with it, and the growth, as you mentioned, the actual figure was 18.4 CAGR. So, and even if you back the acquisition, I was still around 15. We had this 15% goal. I don't think many companies today, except for the tech companies, would have a 15% growth goal. But we did that, and same with our earnings. So, but we made heavy investments, and I always wince when I have people playing the short-term game and not investing in innovation, in R&D, in things that are going to make you even greater and broaden your business.
Right. Bill, I just want to make sure I have my numbers right. In the decade that you served as CEO, you grew the market capitalization from about $1 billion to about $60 billion, revenue from about $750 million to over $6 billion a year. And you grew the company from about 4,700 employees to 26,000 employees. Is that all accurate?
So I bigger today, but yeah, that was up to 2002.
Right. And you set a much stronger foundation for the company's future growth. And then you've been on a number of boards. Notably for our audience, you were on the board of Goldman Sachs for a number of years. And you were on the board of Goldman Sachs during a very sort of pivotal time, thinking about the topics of ethics and finance and leadership in finance. And you played a pretty pivotal role at Goldman Sachs as a board member in really helping strengthen the firm's values-based foundations. Can you share a little bit about your board service at Goldman Sachs? Maybe share some of the stories of the transformation and the evolution of the firm that you saw during your tenure on their board of directors?
Well, I joined Goldman in 2002, joined the board, and retired in 2019 for age reasons. Unfortunately, because I loved it, they actually extended me a year beyond where I should have. because we were going through a transition to David Solomon to becoming a CEO. But beyond that, yeah, in the financial world, even more challenging than manufacturing or high-tech management, there are many, many ethical considerations that come to the fore. And look, I'm no expert in some of the trades Goldman did. To this day, I would never be able to lead in that area. But I tried to bring the firm a sense of strong governance and values. And frankly, sometimes you get tied up with people that are marginal, and some of your employees do, and they have to go away. And you have to take a hard line against that. And it's a fine line. You see it today in something like crypto. You don't know who's ethical and who's not. And I'd seen a lot of this in the 80s. So there with the bond kings, Mike Milken and all, they later went to jail for this. And so when the crisis hit in 2008, Goldman actually had taken steps the year before to increase its capitalization from 25 billion up to 125 billion, which gave us the buffer, but that Lehman didn't have and a lot of other firms. And there was so much marginal stuff going on. Now, I couldn't see it all, but I did have a pretty good eye at people like Countrywide Financial that were really corrupt. And there was a lot of finance that was going on that was very corrupt, and no one was stopping it. And then it all wound up in the mortgage crisis, which Goldman was barely into the mortgage crisis, but into the side of it. But it all blew up. And as you know, it dragged everyone else down with it. It's kind of shocking because every day another bank was falling. It could have been WAMU or, and Fannie and Freddie, of course, went out of business. So this was really the potential collapse of the whole financial system all in 1929. So Goldman got through that well, as did JP Morgan. Morgan Stanley was very lucky to escape, to tell you the truth. Because they got a big loan from the Japanese. The only thing that saved them. But then 2010 comes along, and Goldman had a great year in 29. And 2010 comes along, and all of a sudden Goldman and the media and people's eyes becomes the face of all evil. And so I stepped up had to run a board committee. Lloyd Blankfein asked me to do this, to oversee 150 partners who were under a vice chairman. They were really looking at the whole firm top to bottom and trying to clean up the communications and restore the trust that many investors had lost in Goldman. And I think it did remarkable work. All we did on this board committee was we had 16 minutes meetings to oversee what was going on. But they did some really good work, and they made some fundamental changes that are in place to this day. A lot of times companies don't do that. Wells Fargo should have done that and didn't, and had a lot of problems. Credit Suisse should have done that, didn't do it. And of course, they're not in business now. So I think a lesson is that sometime, rather than just dealing with the instant problem, like the mortgage crisis, you need to look at the whole of the firm. How do we communicate with customers? Are we building their trust? Do they really understand the transactions and things they're getting into? And it's pretty easy to kind of skate on thin ice and avoid that and sell someone your wares, so to speak, and miss what's really going on. So that was a very formative experience for me and being on the Goldman board. And I hope that I stayed true to that. And I think the management was always very value-centered, but it's very easy in finance to get into marginal things,
Right. Full disclosure, Goldman Sachs is one of our founding partners. And
good.
yeah, we're very grateful for Goldman's support. A number of partners at the firm are very supportive. The head of GS Gives, several members of management committee have been very supportive of our work.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, Goldman had that plan. It was good, Ross. And, Hank Paulson was CEO that I'd known from the Defense Department because he sat in the same desk I did after I moved on. And, but he did a great job. Of course, then he moved to Treasury and he probably saved the country during 2008. But he always has a very strong value set, and Lloyd Blankfein carried that on, and now David Solomon is. But I think there was always an outward reaching that was really important, like you just mentioned, of looking, how do we help other people? And I think your organization is so important because we're encouraging young people, like many of those on this call, to develop a solid values and ethical base now. And if you don't do it in college and graduate school and the years when you take your first jobs, if you get caught up with a group of marginal people, it will have an influence on you. You say it while you say, I'm making a lot of money in this hedge fund, even though they're doing marginal things. Actually, you will get caught up in it. So I think there's a lesson there about who are you working with? These people that I really feel good about, these people of integrity. Because if you work with people that don't have integrity, I had spent the first 10 years of my career with Litton Industries and started the consumer microwave oven business. And right after I got out of the Defense Department, had a great opportunity. I was 27 years old, got to be general manager of kind of an entrepreneur, starting his business, going from 10 million to 200 million over the course of 7 years. But the corporation had very marginal values, and eventually it sunk and got sold off to Northrop. But because they were not values grounded, and we see some of that today in companies that don't ground themselves in values. I wonder what's going to happen with Meta. Look, Mark Zuckerberg, I think, is one of the top most wealthy people in the country or in the world. But they've never had a grounding in values, so it's kind of very pragmatic, and so that worries me a lot. So anyone's listening, I think it's really important to get grounded early. Then you can grow from that. But if you don't, Mark didn't have really a chance. I feel sorry for him because at 19, he started his business, and before he had a chance to really get grounded in who he was and what his values are.
I was going to bring this up later, but I think it's more appropriate now. Something that you and I have talked about a lot is state capitalism versus crony capitalism versus free market capitalism. Here at Scholars of Finance, we are firm proponents of free market capitalism with a social conscience, right? Thinking long term, trying to maximize value for all stakeholders as well as shareholders, ultimately trying to maximize human flourishing and human prosperity now and in the long term through free markets. Can you share some of your thoughts? You've been someone I've been really grateful to learn from on this front. Can you share your thoughts on state versus crony versus free market capitalism, what you're seeing in the world today and where you think we need to head?
Yeah, this is a touchy subject, but yeah, I have strong views on it, and I've written about it. I believe in pure capitalism, and I think it's the greatest thing that's ever happened. It's brought so many people out of poverty. It's done so much good, and if you combine that with innovation, because if you go to Germany, it's a very capitalistic place. But why have they not had the innovation we have? I think we have in the United States tremendous amount of system and infrastructure that supports innovation, and frankly, a culture that's deep rooted in the American experience, including for immigrants who move here. It's deeply rooted. So we have this culture, but I think it's so important that we combine that with a sense of integrity. Now what's happening is we see people are capitulating to the power of the president, moving more of a state capitalism. I really question what's going on when NVIDIA and AMD gave away 15% of their sales to the government so that they could sell to the Chinese. Now, first of all, I'm not sure I would sell advanced AI chips to the Chinese. I really think we have to compete, let them create their own. But having done that, I don't think we should have to pay the government. Should Medtronic, when it develops something, have to pay a certain percentage for exporting its products to Germany or Japan? And so I think there's real problems moving in this direction. Even the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, who's an outstanding person, has said he'd like to do more of this. Maybe export, or maybe Lockheed or Boeing, every time they export and sell aircraft overseas, should have to pay a fee. I worry about that. And then we saw the tough example a few weeks ago of Intel and Lip-Bu Tang. I don't know him, but people say he's a great guy, and I believe that. But just because the president of the United States told his board to fire him for something that he was investing in Chinese companies, 2 companies back, I mean, this was a lot of people invested in Chinese companies. There's nothing wrong with that. But anyways, he told him to fire him. They went and got together, and then the president asked him, and he gave the president 10% of the company's value, which was $10 billion. I even questioned, does he have a right to do that without a shareholder vote? You have a right to give away, and just to save his job. So I worry about the state-controlled capitalism that everyone's talking about, and I worry about crony capitalism. Is the fact that you get along well with the president, does that give you a priority? I worry about on tariffs. We're seeing this mess on tariffs, and a lot of it's very personal. Why in the world with Switzerland, where I go a lot, served on the board in Novartis, why would they have to pay 39% export tax? Right next door, Germany and France are paying 15%, or India now is paying 50%. So I really question this kind of move to everything is very personal. I think capitalism should be a market-driven thing, and not. And we do have to set boundaries for capitalism so we don't get outside the values. That's why your organization is so important. So we understand what are those guardrails, because capitalism can go off the rails if you let it. And so I think we need to have some guardrails. Now, recently, one thing I would advocate for just happened 2 days ago. The president came out and said we should move from quarterly earnings to semi-annual. Now, look, this is hugely controversial. The investment community absolutely hates this. I can tell you. I'm not sure the banks do, but the investment community hates this. They want to have quarterly reporting. And I actually think it's a good thing because I think it would focus people building their companies for the long term instead of spending so much time worrying about quarterly earnings. And it's become a big game of expectations. Let me set the expectations low enough. I know I can beat them. Then the market will love it and the stock will go up. That's a big game. It doesn't really say you built your company. Maybe I lost less money than I thought you thought I would, so I'm doing well. Or I grew at 3% instead of 2, and that's supposed to be good. I'm a great believer that we need to look for the long term. And I think boards of directors I've served on have gotten very short term. Not all of them, but a lot of them have gotten very short term oriented and fearful of an activist investor. And I've seen companies selling out to activist investors I worked with, like Unilever, for 10 years. My former company, Medtronic, as an activist investor, and putting people on the board. This is going to lead to very short termism, and it's not going to build the kind of companies that made it, if we want to use that phrase, made America great. So if you look at something like Microsoft or Apple, people like Satya Nadella or Tim Cook, these are really long-term thinkers, and they're doing a brilliant job of building 2 of the world's most valuable companies. So I'll stop there.
I appreciate you moving into this direction, Bill. And in our conversations leading up to this interview, we've talked about this a bit, and I've really appreciated some of your perspective. And you and I have talked about this. Like, I'm still young, still early in my career, and I'm still learning so much.
You're not that. Come on, you're in your mid-30s, but don't give us this. So yeah, I was getting a lot in my mid-30s too. So
Oh, I appreciate that. That was my attempt to say I don't yet feel qualified to criticize a lot of what I'm seeing around me yet, and like really stand up to some of the sort of wrongdoing that we see out there. That's more nuanced, and so I appreciate that you, with your decades of leadership and experience, can speak up against some of the crony capitalist moves you're seeing in the marketplace. With the benefit of wisdom and experience, and actually being able to speak from an enormous knowledge base on this. One thing I wanted to bring up, since we've talked about the Trump administration and them suggesting semi-annual earnings, talking about crony capitalism and free markets, is the Fed and some of the pressure that we're seeing the Trump administration putting on the Federal Reserve in a number of different ways. I would love to hear your take on just the Fed as an independent body, your thoughts on the Federal Reserve, some of what you're seeing from the administration right now.
well, let me start off by saying I'm not an economist, so I have very strong views on the economy, but they're from a business person's perspective. Now, I believe strongly in the independence of the Fed, and I think we have fiscal policy, which is a responsibility of the administration and Congress, and we have the Fed, which is doing monetary policy. Right now in America, we have a real problem in that I think we're moving into a period of stagflation. I think growth this year, next year, everyone's, oh, you better next year. I don't know. I think it'll be like 1%. We're going into a period of inevitable inflation with the tariffs driving inflation up. You look at grocery prices lately, they're all in double digits. This is going to hit the people with the least amount of wealth, the least amount of money, the hardest, where a high percentage of their income goes for food and housing and the things that are getting hit right now, and fuel. Gas has been down, but now it's coming back up. So I worry about that a lot. Their jobs. I think jobs are really threatened right now. We've had a jobs machine, and all of a sudden we're taking it away. And frankly, immigrants have driven a lot of that machine. I'm not talking about the illegal immigrants. You'll never get me to support illegal immigrants, but I strongly support more H-1B visas. I went to school with a lot of people. You probably did too. That our immigrants came from outside the U.S. I think they add tremendously. And most of them stay here in the U.S. and build companies. And you look at how many of the great tech companies are built by immigrants. And so I think we need people like that to build our economy. And I'm worried about that. And I think that's going to result in slow growth. And we are probably moving into a period of stagflation. It's very hard for the Fed to do because it can't correct the sins on the fiscal side easily. And just because it tilt towards, lower interest rates and more jobs? Does it higher interest rates to worry about inflation? It's kind of trapped both way on either way. And whether they go up quarter point or down tomorrow, there's a meeting or today, I don't think quarter points can make that much difference. Yeah, I'd like to see interest rates low too. For a long time, they've been very, very low. But I lived through the 70s when inflation was like 18 to 20%. And it can get out of control. No one ever said it, thought that was a good thing. It just got out of control. And so I think you have to watch it very closely. And the Fed has done a magnificent job. So long-winded way of saying, let's keep them independent and let them make good decisions on the economy for those of us that are not economists.
One of the things that has really been on my mind lately and that we've been talking about as a team about the role of the financial system in our economy. Over the course of the last several weeks, there's been some really hard news socially, politically. The country's been divided. And I actually tried to follow your lead and I put out a post essentially calling for compassion and humility, for unity, for healing, for forgiveness in the country. And talked to some of our boards and our donors, and we all agreed that was not outside of our lane because you've seen the financial system change and evolve. The economy is so financialized today, and we are this community of people with great influence and a lot of capital, with which comes great responsibility. I want to ask you to share some of your views on the role the financial system plays in the economy, the financial system's growth, and what responsibilities you think finance and investing leaders have in our society today.
Back when I told you the Goldman stories in the 2008 to 2012, I was trying to explain to everyone publicly the role that banks and financial institutions have in our economy. Now, it is true that only half of the financial system is regulated and the rest is unregulated, which can lead to some very unusual circumstances. But I really feel that, banks are like the gas in your tank, and the financial systems. Now we have private credit, but without gas in your tank, you can't build a company. You can't start a new factory. You can't start a company. You can't get venture capital. And so this is critical that we have a strong financial system. I think the strength of the U.S. financial markets, broadly speaking, not just the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, but the strength of our financial markets has enabled entrepreneurs and innovators and company builders to be successful, like Medtronic, because the banks were always there for us. They always supported us, and we never let them down. And yeah, a lot of companies are going to fail. That's true. Failure rate of startups, but some of them will be widely successful. And that's really important. That, I remember spending half a day at NVIDIA a few years ago. Where did they come from? Out of the blue. I never guessed when I was there back in 2017 that Jensen Huang was going to do what he's done. But it's, here's a $4 trillion company. That is American entrepreneurship. This is not happening, sadly, in Europe, where people are very well educated and very intelligent and very thoughtful, and they have a sound financial, but they aren't as oriented towards people that fund them taking risks. So I'm a big believer in venture capital, and I think private equity can help get companies successful if they have some focus on the long term. That's a big concern of mine. But I think that having that fuel in your tank is critical. So when people all play Wi-Fi microwave oven days, we had to get funding for expanding new facilities, and it was there. And so I think those opportunities are really important in the U.S. It's all because of the financial system. But then we have to make sure it has guardrails so it doesn't go off the rails.
Bill, I want to kind of dig in here. One thing that you and I talked about earlier was the sort of Trump's call for semi-annual earnings instead of quarterly earnings. One thing that seems clear is that the sort of power and influence the financial system has is growing because increasingly you have this consolidation of capital and ownership capital, right? BlackRock one of our other founding partners, managing $10 trillion of assets and, completing thousands of proxy votes per year across their portfolio of holdings. The proliferation of large private equity firms, Blackstone, one of our partners, over $1 trillion in assets, several, $400 to $700 billion AUM private equity firms. The proliferation of private credit, trillions of dollars now, this outgrowth of private credit. There's a lot of folks who have a lot of ownership stake and power and influence over the companies themselves. So one thing I want to ask is how can finance leaders and investors, how can we as board members and owners think more long-term? How can we combat the pressure for short-term profits at all costs and think about long-term, broad-based value creation? What are some of the things you've seen work or that you teach on that front?
Yeah, I've been working on this for a very long time because I think what happens is people short term, they get a short term gain, and mostly it goes to the financial people. But it's the companies that are builders that have created huge value. I mentioned NVIDIA at 4 billion, but both Microsoft, I mentioned earlier, and Apple are over 3 billion. And now Google's in that category. But these companies didn't even exist 25, 30 years ago. They've come out of nowhere. And look what they've done. They're spectacular, but they've done it through innovation. And yeah, the finance system funded them, gave them the opportunity, supported them. Some of them have gone through a dark period like Microsoft did under Steve Ballmer. But so I think it's critical to have that financing there, but not that all the decisions are made by short-term active investors or people that just want to play the short-term game. And a lot of the system is set up that way. I think we should be paying compensation long-term. People are making incredible amounts of money, but I think it's only based on long-term value they're creating and then to be participants in that. In fact, at Medtronic, we made sure every employee was a shareholder so that their interests were aligned with that of our investors, our shareholders. And so we actually, on our 50th anniversary, we gave everyone 100 shares of stock that had been there 6 months or more. And so it's kind of an amazing thing that they got all of a sudden, they had $7,500 and it was basically a retirement fund, but still they had the money. And so I think one of the problems we have in our economy is half the people are investing in the stock market and doing very well, and the other half are not. And this is particularly falling hard for the millennial generation. I'm not sure Gen Z's fully figured this out, but your millennial generation is feeling that unless you come from wealth, it's very hard to accumulate wealth unless you come from a moneyed family. But if you're making it on your own, which I did, you are, it's really tough to accumulate wealth. And people used to do it through housing. Now, a lot of people don't even have the money to invest in buying a home. So they rent. Some people don't even want to own a car, but not that you can make money on cars, but you would make money on homes. I mean, I bought my first house for, at $40,000, and, then you keep trading up. And those vehicles are not as readily available today, and because of the high interest rates. And at the same time, a lot of people can't get into the market. I got my grandson into it, saving his money and helping advise him. He's only 17 years old. But I think it's important that people do that and have the opportunity to grow with the market and learn about it. So I think even if you're going to be in the industry, it's really important you learn how the financial world works. You may not be a star commodities trader at Goldman Sachs and make a lot of money doing that, but you need to understand how it works and have an appreciation and understand, which the economists don't want to talk about, the long-term, short-term trade-offs. Every day, I had to think about those at Medtronic. Every day. There was never a day that went by we weren't thinking about that.
I appreciate you bringing up the short-term and long-term trade-offs. That actually segues into my next question. But first, I just want to say I also appreciate you sharing that. A lot of people can't even afford to buy a home today. That feels like a punch in the solar plexus, or I should say it resonates a lot for me, just because my wife and I are currently trying to buy our first home here in Silicon Valley in the Bay Area.
Pretty expensive out there. You could find cheaper places to buy homes.
Oh man, I got to tell you, next time we do lunch in Minneapolis, it'll be hard for me to come back to this to Silicon Valley. It literally costs twice as much to buy a third of the house that's 50 years older here than it does in where my family lives in Minnesota.
But that's not even going if you want to go to Alabama or go to Nebraska. Find a lot cheaper than here too, but I'm not sure if you want to chase that.
You talked about the short-term and long-term trade-offs that you're compelling your grandson and other people that you advise to think about. And the question that segues into neatly is about greed. And you and I've talked about this quite a bit, right? At our last lunch, when you were here visiting your son, we talked about the nature of greed a bit and how at Scholars of Finance, we teach the 3 antidotes to greed, at least that we teach, that we're aware of. Contentment, knowing when we have enough, gratitude, appreciating what we already do have instead of focusing on what we don't, and then generosity, actually giving away what we have and having an abundance mindset and sharing openly from this place of contentment and gratitude. And you and I have talked about the destructive nature of greed. It forces people into short-term thinking. It can lead to unethical behavior. It can destroy marriages. It can destroy friendships. It can destroy companies' reputations. How do you advise mentees and CEOs and leaders that you mentor to guard against greed.
Wow. We actually asked this in the classroom. The question is raised, how much is enough? And some people would say more. But, I tell people, regardless of your religious faith or if you're an atheist or an agnostic, you can't take it with you. So what's the purpose of accumulating funds? Is it to, take your family on vacation, have a nice home, but do you need a $30 million home to do that? I'm a great believer that to whom much is given, much is expected. So Penny and I have given away, we did very well on Medtronic stock. I'll say that. And I took my Honeywell stock and reinvested in Medtronic. And I went there. I felt I had some control. And I think when I left, 97% of my net worth was tied up with Medtronic stock. But okay, so we've given away 60% of our net worth because we've got more than enough to need. Our sons are doing well. They're in good shape. And our grandkids, there's an education fund, but they got to make it on their own. So I think if, wealthy families just pass along an empire, people never have a chance of making it on their own like you have and like I have. And there is a certain amount of self-esteem that comes from that. But I do think, back to your point, I'm in a period of generativity, but it is about giving back. And I think when you get to that position in life, you should give back. So I believe strongly in the concept of paying it forward. So people helped me along the way, gave me tremendous mentoring and advice. I benefit from that. They're all deceased now, so I can't give back to them other than say a prayer of gratitude. But I can give back to other people who are coming along behind, and hopefully you and others will do well. And then you'll be in a spirit of giving back. And I do think that's what life is all about. And I really do. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about my purpose in life and realizing it's really been the same since I was in college. It really hasn't changed. And that's even there, I was trying to mentor younger leaders, and it's trying to help leaders reach their full potential. I did that in every job I ever had. I was never an expert in anything, but I did try to help leaders see their potential and reach it. And I hope people on this call will realize that your potential and realize you can step up to do so much more and have widen your view. Like one of my mentors, really, it was a dean at Harvard Business School, widen my view from being a narrow engineer to seeing the potential of what could be done.
Bill, I think that's a perfect segue into a discussion about authentic leadership. I'm currently, as we talked about before we started recording, I'm reading True North, the Emerging Leadership Edition. I've been writing and completing the field book, um, in advance of the leadership program that we're doing together soon. And I'm loving the material. And I want to ask you, for our listeners, to really talk about, define authentic leadership. I saw a one-sentence summary. Authentic leaders have discovered their true north, align people around a shared purpose and values, and empower others to lead authentically in order to create value for all stakeholders. I'm pulling that right out of the field book. That is verbatim right out of the field book. And I want to ask if you can really unpack the authentic leadership framework for our listeners.
Well, let me say that back in the 80s and 90s, I was at variance with what people were writing about leadership and what people were practicing, because it was all about self-interest. That's the economists told us. It was all about getting ahead. Even if you had to step over someone else, it was about having charisma. They were teaching classes in leadership style, which people pushed me into those a couple of times, and I failed at two different points in my life. So I don't think leadership is about that. I think it starts with a core, Ross, of who are you? Who is a person inside? What values, what principles, what beliefs make up who you are? And that becomes your true north. And if you figure that out, you can't go out and lead other people until you can lead yourself. I've often said the hardest person you'll ever have to lead is yourself. But you got to figure out who you are. And if you're trying to make up for some deficit or something you didn't get from your family or overcome this, you have to deal with those issues. We all go through those difficult times, as I pointed out right at the outset. But I think knowing who you are then gives you a base to become the kind of leader that you want to be. So you know your true north, and then you can find your North Star, which is really your purpose to lead. So why would you want to be in a leadership role? Why would you want to do what you're doing? You can make more money being a stockbroker than you are now. Why are you doing what you're doing? And you must have a deeper purpose for doing that. So figuring that out for each of us is critical to our lives. And when we figure that out, then we're grounded. And the one thing we've interviewed over 225 people for my book, True North, in 3 different tranches because we've had different editions as life changes, but the principles haven't changed. But the thing we learn is that the key to leaders is being grounded in who you are. And if you can get that grounding, and when you give that up, it's hard to go back. When you abandon your values, not your parents' values, but your values, you abandon your purpose, you abandon your beliefs and your principles and go a different way, say just to make money. And there are so many temptations, like gold lying in the street in the financial area. But why are you doing this? Because I think it can really lead people astray from what they really want to do. And frankly, it's hard to get back. Once you get outside of that circle of principles, beliefs, and values or ethics, then you start violating them. Then it's like the slippery slope. You just made a little deviation. So I'll tell you a story. I had a colleague that I looked up to. I was served on 3 boards with him. He was chair of the board of dean's advisors at Harvard Business School. He got me on the World Economic Forum board. I got him on the Goldman Sachs board. He had been head of McKinsey for 3 times, and he was born in India and got involved in insider trading. And at the most critical time, but Goldman had taken an investment from Warren Buffett that we knew about but hadn't been announced, and he traded that to an inside trader to think he was going to get great gain and become a billionaire. He was worth $120 million at the time. It's a long time ago. Poor guy went to jail for 2 years, and he's totally lost his career because at the end of the day, he's almost as old as I am. All you have is your reputation. No one looks at you no one's interested in how much money you have. They said, are you someone that's true to your beliefs when you get to be this stage? And sadly, he's never been able to come back from that. And so all because he lost sight of his values, lost sight of what he was, and he had done everything. He got caught up with greed to try to be a billionaire. Now, if you're a billionaire, does that make you better than I am because I'm, not that? I don't think so. So people are going to know you by your integrity, your character, and your values, not by your net worth statement. So I used to tell MBAs, Ross, I still would, if your self-worth is based on your net worth, you're in trouble. You don't have a self-worth that's beyond your net worth. But I see a lot of people like that. And so it doesn't work like that. I sound like I'm preaching. I don't mean to. I'm just sharing what I believe.
I don't think it sounds like you're preaching at all. Bill, you're sharing wisdom and observations from, 80 years of life and 60 years of leadership. And so there's a reason that hundreds of thousands of people follow you on LinkedIn and listen to you and want to hear your advice. I bristle a bit at you, almost kind of discounting what you're saying in that way, because I think you're here for a reason sharing it with us. But B, I also think what you're saying is so important for the world to hear. When you look at some of what's been going on in the world, some of the political violence, some of the issues in our country and the world, it is clear we need more compassion, loving and serving others, trying to help other people, seeing the best in other people. And we need more humility, right? We need people to recognize I'm not the center of the world. I one day will die and I have this short time on earth, keeping themselves in perspective, knowing they have a lot to learn. I think those are 2 of the biggest antidotes to some of the greed and ego that you're talking about. The fact that someone who's worth hundreds of millions of dollars and is at the top of the world, of the corporate world, I know you're talking about, like a famous leader, and because they need to get to billionaire status, they would go and do unethical things. It just absolutely blows my mind that still happens. It appears today that when you talk to folks about these things, some people almost bristle that we even talk about this because they're like, what are you, some Marxist or communist telling us we shouldn't want to make as much money as we possibly can? And there's almost like this extreme reaction. But in reality, we're saying, no, like free market capitalists right here believe in individual political freedoms. We're in the same quadrant of the political compass. I'm just saying we should know when enough is enough and prioritize trying to help other people. This notion has been uniting groups of people for thousands of years, and it just seems like there's a great need for it. I want to ask you, Bill, forgive me for maybe now sounding like I'm preaching, and I'm clearly unqualified to be doing that. What do you think compassion and humility look like in action in the business and finance world in these months ahead?
Well, first of all, I appreciate you bringing up the words compassion, and I would add empathy, caring, And I think, that you're talking all the right things, all make up who you are. That's essential to your emotional intelligence. And I think one of the things I would say today is that we're moving into a world of AI. AI is with us, but it's going to explode in tens of hundreds of billions of dollars being invested. What's going to happen, and particularly to a lot of young people on this call, there aren't going to be those backroom jobs where you're running numbers because all that's going to be done on AI. And if you want to analyze a company you're working for a financial firm and you want to analyze a company, you go to AI and get the information first and then add on to it. But, a lot of those jobs are going to go away. So what jobs are going to remain for people here listening to this call? So it's the jobs where people have high EQ, high emotional intelligence. Okay. They have the qualities, Ross, you're talking about, that's key. Okay. They have empathy, they have passion, they have compassion. These are not qualities of AI. AI may replace people with a pure IQ. And we've had a period of 30, 40, 50 years where we venerated people with the highest IQ, smartest guy in the room. Actually, a lot of those people didn't make it because they didn't have EQ, and including at Goldman Sachs, where you have a lot of very brilliant people. The people that couldn't match their IQ with a high EQ got pushed out. They didn't make it in leadership roles. So you're a leader today, you have to have both. Yes, you have to be smart, but somebody say, "Oh, he's so smart." Well, there are a lot of smart people in the world, I can tell you, but it's the emotional intelligence that will distinguish you. To combine that with your intellect and your knowledge and your understanding, that's going to make you successful as a leader. And I think you obviously have that, Ross, but I want to encourage everyone listening in to think about, it took me a while to develop EQ, but I think you've got to have that because these qualities are going to be the differentiating. And then you're going to have the capacity to integrate very complex subjects into an integrated whole and have the intuition, the understanding to move forward. But you do that from this grounded base when you have both high IQ and high EQ. So I think this is really essential. And so because the world is going to change dramatically and the creativity, a lot of it comes from EQ. It wasn't just a logical thing that led to some of the breakthroughs in creating social media or creating search or creating online retail. You guys, right now, we treat this as normal, but it wasn't normal 25 years ago. It didn't exist. And people didn't really believe in it. So people create new business models. It's really stunning. So I just want to encourage people to think about how do you do both of those things. And you're obviously an advocate, Ross, for high emotional intelligence. And that integrity is essential to that. You can't have high EQ without integrity. And it has to do not just integrity, whether you're honest in your business dealings, but in your personal dealings. Yeah, can I count on you? Do you have accountability? Are you true? Are you a blamer of other people? Are you true to what you believe? And if you're not, then who are you? And can I really trust you? Trust is everything. In a lot of ways, it's gone out. The air has gone out of the trust balloon, and we need to rebuild that. Because if you're working with a financial institution, if you're working with an employer, do you trust them? Do they trust you? And if the answer to that is no, then you're in trouble.
Right. Bill, you released 7 lessons for leading in crisis in the midst of unprecedented economic challenges. And in today's volatile world, which of those lessons feel most urgent for leaders to internalize right now?
Well, number one for me is face reality, starting with yourself. Now let's take the face reality. There are a lot of things going on. Don't be in denial of what's going on, say, in Ukraine with Russia. Don't be in denial of what's going on in the Middle East. Don't be in denial with companies that are going to get in real trouble, or the main benefit of crypto is making money over hyping something that could be used for lack of transparency, which is to say corruption. So be careful about not facing that reality. Or the stock market's been up for so many quarters, it will come down. And that's a reality you have to face. How many people really faced when we first heard about COVID and some of the things going on? How many people heard about that in January 2020 or went into denial about that? And then we saw the ravages and how long it took. Thank God for the vaccines. We might still be with it. In fact, our foundation had just had a long bout with COVID, so it's still with it. But my point is space that reality. Now, starting with yourself. If you have a bad culture in your company, look yourself in the mirror and say, what am I doing? And I think a lot of people don't do that. They don't face it. They're blamers. They blame other people for a lack of reality. So I think that's really critical. And there are many other lessons that come. I think another one is you've got to follow your true north. You've got to stay true to your values. So right now, and you asked about capital, people are willing to sacrifice their values on the altar of pleasing a powerful person. Let's take Target stores. Brian Cornell, under no pressure, dropped and changed his values. Values have been what they built their reputation on vis-a-vis Walmart. He dropped that and left 400,000 people not knowing what they stand for anymore in anticipation of pressure, which never came. He didn't have the courage to stand up. Where over at Costco, Ron Vaqueras, the new CEO, stood for what the company's always stood up for. And he said, okay, we'll take this on. We're going to stand for what we are and we'll put it to a vote, shareholder vote. He had all these attorney generals suing him and everything else. And he went for a vote and got a 98% favorable vote to stand behind their values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I don't go for letters. I don't care about that, but it's the kind of culture you have. You need to look yourself in the mirror and say, am I part of the problem? Not just blaming others.
That reminds me of Jim Collins' window mirror principle. When things are going wrong, the best leaders look in the mirror. If we're holding up a mirror to all of ourselves as current and future finance and investing leaders, I want to talk about transformation and where you think we need to go from here. You've led through a lot of major transformations, and it feels like the world is transforming around us technologically, politically, economically, socially, with the opportunity for us to make it better and the ever-present risk that things slide backwards for some period of time or go in the wrong direction. What kind of transformation do you want to see in the business world right now? What direction or directions do you think business and finance leaders should be heading in right now?
Well, first of all, I'm telling them stay true to their values. They're going to have to be very adaptable. So in leadership, being flexible and adaptable is going to become an essential quality. Doing a 10-year strategic plan, my colleague Michael Porter kind of invented strategy. Strategy is really important, but your strategy may have to be adapted every few months. We did at Medtronic all the time because things would change. So you don't adapt your values and principles. That's why I was picking on Target, where I served on the board for 12 years. Stay true to that, but adapt your strategy, adapt your tactics to what's going, and adapt rapidly to change. That's why I kind of like Walmart's been so wildly successful, because they're very rapidly adapting. Goldman Sachs, you mentioned earlier, has been a rapid adapter to changes in the financial market where others were not. And they've been able to, JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, same thing. He's been very rapidly able to a huge enterprise. So it's not just small companies. So I think there is that capacity to do that and to be at the forefront of the change, but having a grounding in your true north. That's what's essential. And when you have that grounding, then you can have great change. I'm talking about large organizations where you have to bring people with you. And if they know what you stand for, then they're willing to adapt to changes in strategy and tactics, and successful companies have to do that. Look how Satya Nadella transformed Microsoft. They were failing because all they were doing is Office and Windows. And you got them into the cloud, been wildly successful. You got them into LinkedIn and social media. And it's the highest integrity social media site. Okay, got him into gaming because he thought that was a very important thing. And now they're the leader in AI because he put a huge investment on it. Does he know where it's going? No, none of us know where it's going. But they're going to push that envelope to do it and be a leader in this field. So he had the courage to adapt rapidly to changes and get out in front of it. And I think that's what you're going to see with great leaders in the future.
I feel that call landing personally and acutely. When you think about AI automating jobs, changing the landscape of financial firms, how much they're hiring, bringing in fresh talent, what that does to the economic system. Yuval Noah Harari, he was the author of Sapiens that, had got a lot of kind of fanfare. Then he wrote Homo Deus, where he was predicting for the future. And he predicted a, quote, useless class. If technology keeps advancing and you get to a post-scarcity society, at some point, 40%, 60% of people just don't need to work because everything's been automated and is taken care of. That was his prediction, not mine. But with that as a 50-year prediction, I felt myself in the more near term thinking, how do we equip our students and our future leaders to adapt to the world of AI, doubling down on investments in their emotional intelligence, in humility and integrity and curiosity, because AI won't replace relationships. Like deals will still get done between people, right? And we're working really hard on that front to try to be adaptable.
So you get it, and you're on track, and I hope others appreciate that's exactly right. And that's where you have to go in this world. That relationships, you want to be a leader. I hope everyone on this call wants to be a leader, Ross, like you are. You have to build relationships with people that you trust. You can't build a relationship with anyone you don't trust. If I lie to you, why would you trust me? So there is that trust has to be there between people. But that's about relationships, and that's what's going to matter.
Bill, that segues perfectly into my rapid fire question round. I know we're coming up on time and you're very busy. I've got three final questions if I can pitch those to you in rapid succession.
Go ahead.
All right. First, speaking about relationships, can you share a mentor or two that have significantly shaped how you think about leadership, integrity, and decision making?
When I left Medtronic, I was kind of kicking around for like 8 months. No idea what I was going to do. I looked at all kinds of crazy things in organizations that I later didn't do. And I went to a session with David Gergen and Warren Bennis. David, both of them have passed away now. They're both close personal friends at the Aspen Institute called Leadership and Character. Fantastic. I got to know Warren Bennis there, and he adopted me as his mentee because he saw the things I'd written in a book called my first book, Authentic Leadership, is he saw that. And so he was fantastic in teaching me leadership as he saw it. He was going to introduce the idea of crucibles, which I think are critical. And I've been told people, don't bring that up. People don't want to talk about negative things. Well, you have to deal with those crucibles in your life, as I have. And only when you deal with that can you be successful. And I think a lot of people don't, and they try to go beyond that. So Warren was a tremendous mentor for me. David Gergen was a friend. We're the same age. He died last June. Just a great human being. And we kind of worked closely together. He at the Kennedy School on Public Leadership, and I at Harvard Business School on Business Leaders. And I'm very sad about his death. So this has been hard. But, when you do that, then you have to say, okay, who's going to carry on? And you look for the leaders of the future that can carry on. That's what I'm doing right now. You're one of those people.
Bill, you're incredibly kind. And that segues into my next rapid fire question, actually. I just felt so honored that you adopted me as a mentee as we've gotten to know each other. And I wanted to ask you, you've mentored dozens of Fortune 500 CEOs, billionaire investors, emerging leaders, younger leaders like myself, or I shouldn't say younger leaders since I'm in my mid 30s. What are some of the qualities and characteristics that you look for in people that you mentor?
Integrity, willingness to be open and honest and deal from, about who they are, that they're prepared to deal with their own humanity and want to get better, that they have a growth mindset, as Carol Dweck out of Stanford talks about, that I want to grow, I want to develop all my life. I still think I'm still growing. Just listening to this conversation with you, I feel like I'm growing. So you're constantly growing in life. But when you stop growing is when you go to depth. So I think having that growth mindset is really critical. Having the integrity to go with it, having courage. The missing characteristic we didn't get into is a lot of leaders lack courage. A lot of people are capitulating to powers in Washington because they lack courage. And sometimes you just have to take a stand about things, knowing you're going to get criticized for all sides, knowing you may make a mistake, knowing it cost you your job, but you stood for what you believe. And I think that's courage. And I think we need more leaders with courage. As I look at CEOs, the missing quality in a lot of very talented executives and managers is that they lack courage. And so I think that's a crucial element to anyone's success today.
Thanks, Bill. My last question, and this is a softball. You've been very generous with your support of Scholars of Finance. You've spoke at one of our events recently with several of our donors. You've been mentoring me. Here you are coming on our podcast, and there's more to come in the months ahead that's already in planning. What is it about the Scholars of Finance mission that's inspired you to get involved?
Well, I think you have a mission to bring integrity, character, and courage to the financial world, which is what is desperately needed, because there are a lot of marginal people that go into finance because of the amount of money, and the temptation is always there to go off track. Sometimes you get outside that. Some of the examples I've given, it's hard for people to get back on track. So I think helping people in their college years, post-college years, get grounded in their beliefs, their values, and their principles. Those three things I think that Scholars of Finance does is so important, because then they'll be put in a position to lead with character to become those authentic leaders of the future. And because they know their true north, and then by being leaders of character, they will attract other people around them. And the financial world can have a higher level of character. So I think what you're doing is fantastic. I know many people admire what you and others are doing there to build the notion of high character, high integrity leaders. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Bill. Really appreciate the kind words. With that, we'll wrap up here. Thank you for the time today. Would love to have you on again in the future. And just thank you again for coming to share your wisdom and inspiration with our community.
Thank you, Ross.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Investing in Integrity by Scholars of Finance. I want to share a huge thank you to our advisors, directors, donors, team, and our members who make this all possible. If you like this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you have any feedback for us, you can send it to hello@scholarsoffinance.org or by visiting our website. Until next time, please join us on our mission to inspire character and integrity in the finance leaders of tomorrow.